And we're live with another episode of Bad Morning News. Bad morning to all of you out there who are listening. Just posted this on Facebook, tagged about 100 people. So let me type in that Patreon link to the description. Hope y'all are having a bad morning, and I hope y'all have good reason to, because the world is getting worse and it's on rails at this point. So, just housekeeping, we're brought to you by Brave, the ad-resistant, track-resistant browsing experience, which supports creators directly through the Basic Attention Token, which is a cryptocurrency that actively supports people who sign up to be part of that program. Additionally, it's brought to you by the Cash App, a Federal Reserve note, and Bitcoin wallet that comes with a Visa card. So you can get that if you'd like, and also a Liberty mug, mugs that you can use to piss off your coworkers while also consuming fluids. And there are also plenty other ways to support the show with the bottom link in the description of the video. So feel free to do that. Would be very, very helpful if any of you would do any of those. But I guess we'll just jump into the news. This is from antiwar.com, and it's something I was going to read yesterday. It's from Colin Hallinan. It's time for NATO to go the way of the Warsaw Pact. The outcome of July's 11 to 12 NATO meeting in Brussels got lost amid the media's obsession with President Trump's bomb bust, but the summit declaration makes for sober reading. The media reported that the 28-page document upgraded military readiness and was harshly critical of Russia, but there wasn't much detail beyond that. Details matter, because that's where the devil hides. One such detail is NATO's Readiness Initiative that will beef up naval, air, and ground forces in the eastern portion of the alliance. NATO is moving to base troops in Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, and the Czech Republic, and Poland. Since Georgia and Ukraine have been invited to join the alliance, some of those forces could end up deployed on Moscow's western and southern borders. And that should give us pause. A recent European Leadership Network's study titled Envisioning a Russia-NATO Conflict concludes the current Russia-NATO deterrence relationship is unstable and dangerously so. The ELN is an independent think tank of military, diplomatic, and political leaders that fosters collaborative solutions to defense and security issues. High on the study's list of dangers is inadvertent conflict, which ELN concludes may be the most likely scenario for a breakout of hostilities. The close proximity of Russian and NATO forces is a major concern, argues the study, but also the fact that Russia and NATO have been adapting their military postures toward early reaction, thus making rapid escalation much more likely to happen. With armed forces nose to nose, quote, a passage from crisis to conflict might be sparked by the actions of regional commanders or military commanders at local levels, or come as a consequence of an unexpected incident or accident. According to the European Leadership Council, there have been more than 60 such incidents in the last year. Which side is advancing? The NATO document is indeed hard on Russia, which it blasts for the illegal and illegitimate annexation of Crimea. Its, quote, provocative military activities, including near NATO borders, and its, quote, significant investments in the modernization of its strategic nuclear forces. Unpacking all that requires a little history, which isn't the media's strong suit. The story goes back more than 3 decades to the fall of the Berlin Wall and eventual reunification of Germany. At the time, the Soviet Union had some 380,000 troops in what was then the German Democratic Republic, or East Germany. Those forces were there as part of the treaty ending World War II, and the Soviets were concerned that removing them could end up threatening the USSR's borders. The Russians had been invaded at terrible costs 3 times in a little more than a century. So in the early 1990s, West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl, U.S. Secretary of State James Baker, and Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev cut a deal. The Soviets agreed to withdraw troops from Eastern Europe as long as NATO didn't fill the vacuum or recruit members of the Soviet-dominated Warsaw Pact. Baker promised Gorbachev that NATO would not move 1 inch east. The agreement was never written down, but it was followed in practice. NATO stayed west of the Oder and Neisse rivers, spreading Neisse, actually, I think that's how you pronounce that, separating Germany and Poland, and Soviet troops returned to Russia. The Warsaw Pact was dissolved in 1991, but President Bill Clinton blew all that up in 1999 when the US and NATO intervened in the civil war between the Serbs and Albanians over the Serbian province of Kosovo. Behind the new American doctrine of, quote, responsibility to protect, NATO opened a massive 11-week bombing campaign against Serbia. From Moscow's point of view, the war was unnecessary. The Serbs were willing to withdraw their troops and restore Kosovo's autonomous status, but NATO demanded a large occupation force that would be immune from Serbian law, something the nationalist-minded Serbs would never agree to. It was virtually the same provocative language the Austrian-Hungarian Empire had presented to the Serbs in 1914, language that set off World War I. In the end, NATO lopped off part of Serbia to create Kosovo and redrew the post-World War II map of Europe, exactly what the alliance charges today that Russia has done with the seizure of Crimea. But NATO didn't stop there. In 1999, the alliance recruited former Warsaw Pact members Hungary, Poland, and the Czech Republic, adding Bulgaria and Romania 4 years later. By the end of 2004, Moscow was confronted with NATO and Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia to the north, Poland to the west, and Bulgaria and Turkey to the south. Since then, the alliance has added Slovakia, Slovenia, Albania, Croatia, and Montenegro. It has invited Georgia, Ukraine, Macedonia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina to apply as well. When the NATO document chastises Russia for, quote, provocative military activities near the NATO border, it is referring to maneuvers within Russia's own borders, or one of its few allies, Belarus. As author and foreign policy analyst Anatol Levin points out, even a child can look at a 1988 map of Europe and see which side is advanced in what direction. NATO also accuses Russia of, quote, continuing a military buildup in Crimea without a hint that those actions might be in response to what the alliance document calls its, quote, substantial increase in NATO's presence and maritime activity in the Black Sea. Russia's largest naval port on the Black Sea is Sevastopol in the Crimea. Worrisome disconnects. One does not expect even-handedness in such a document, but there are disconnects in this one that are worrisome. Yes, the Russians are modernizing their nuclear forces, but the Obama administration was first out that gate in 2009 with its $1.5 trillion program to upgrade the U.S.'s nuclear weapon system. Both programs are a bad idea. Some of the document's language about Russia is aimed at loosening purse strings at home. NATO members agreed to cough up more money, a decision that preceded Trump's Brussels tantrum on spending. There is some wishful thinking on Afghanistan. Quote, our resolute support mission is achieving success, when, in fact, things have seldom been worse. There are vague references to the Middle East and North Africa, nothing specific, but a reminder that NATO is no longer confining its mission to what was supposedly set up to do: keep the Americans in, the Russians out, and the Germans down. The Americans are still in. One should take Trump's threat of withdrawal with a boulder-sized piece of salt. There is no serious evidence the Russians ever planned to come in, and the Germans have been up since they joined NATO in 1955. Indeed, it was the addition of Germany that sparked the formation of the Warsaw Pact. While Moscow is depicted as an aggressive adversary, NATO surrounds Russia on three sides, has deployed anti-missile systems in Poland, Romania, Spain, Turkey, and the Black Sea, and has a 12-to-1 advantage in military spending. With opposing forces now toe-to-toe, it would not take much to set off a chain reaction that could end in a nuclear exchange. Yet instead of inviting a dialogue, the document boasts that the alliance has suspended all practical civilian and military cooperation between NATO and Russia. The solution seems obvious. First, a return to the 1998 military deployment. While it's unlikely that former members of the Warsaw Pact would drop their NATO membership, a withdrawal of non-nation troops from NATO members that border Russia would cool things off. Second, the removal of anti-missile systems that never should have been deployed in the first place. In turn, Russia could remove the middle-range Iskander missiles NATO is complaining about and agree to talks aimed at reducing nuclear stockpiles. But long range, it's finally time to rethink alliances. NATO was a child of the Cold War when the West believed that the Soviets were a threat, but Russia today is not the Soviet Union, and there's no way Moscow could be stupid enough to attack a superior military force. The old ways of thinking are not only outdated, but also dangerous. It's time NATO went the way of the Warsaw Pact. So that's a nice thing to start off your morning with, to recognize that they're ramping up war rhetoric. And hey, maybe at a similar time that they're talking about Iran, Russia, and China, all as potential players at the Bilderberg group. But that's just a separate issue. So,
well, I mean, it puts a different light on Bosnia entirely as well. If you think about it, most people would have thought of that as, oh, we came in to save the day, instead of, oh, we came in and fucked everything up.
exactly.
So, it's a very different twist on the old tale.
Well, and not to mention the fact that like these sorts of like alliances are almost always built so that like you can essentially form a hegemony. And when you start to form hegemonies, you need to have a bunch of little footholds in any given region. And I've been making the point for a long time on this channel and others that Israel is effectively their Middle Eastern foothold, and that the reason they support them after such human rights abuses and such egregious nationalist tendencies that would make, Hitler blush, especially given the massive military force that Israel has to bear, and especially given the fact that they've got a huge amount of aid coming in from the US every month, second only to Afghanistan. And, the fact that effectively they could call on the US as an ally, especially with a Republican president at any given point to basically force their way. It seems like a really easy thing to say that things are very, very bad and going to get worse because all these alliances seem to just be building more and more access to that region.
True.
But anyway, just thought, because I wanted to get that out there, because I think it's a valuable thing to remember that not all these alliances are built for the good of the average American, to put it really calmly. And speak and they're in a government institution. It's not going to be a fantastic alliance because it's built so that government can continue governmenting. And as an anarchist, I don't really believe that that's ever going to be in the people's interest, at least not the majority of the people. There's some people that are going to take advantage of it, but whatever.
There's always a small minority that it advantages, but that's the point. It's a small minority.
Yeah, well, and on that score, let's talk about that religious liberty arm from the DOJ, because I think that that's a relatively good place to talk about new government bullshit that's intruding on personal liberty by claiming to defend it.
And to be fair, this is basically as one arm dies, another arm is grown. So the DOJ's new religious liberty arm set to investigate the SPLC. So on Monday morning, Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced a new religious liberty task force in the Department of Justice to defend religious freedom as laid out in last October's memorandum. In his remarks, Sessions referenced the Southern Poverty Law Center, or the SPLC, as a threat to religious liberty, suggesting a new task force may investigate or target the left-wing smear group. A dangerous movement undetected by many is now challenging and eroding our great tradition of religious freedom, Sessions declared, adding that this movement must be confronted and defeated. He also lamented that one group can actively target religious groups by labeling them hate group on the basis of insincerely held religious beliefs. Sessions emphasized that new Religious Liberty Task Force represents a sea change from the Obama administration, under which federal agencies often use the SPLC hate group markings. His direct reference to the SPLC in his remarks suggested that the new task force may investigate the left-wing smear group. According to the DOJ, the task force will develop new strategies involving litigation, policy, and legislation to protect and promote religious liberty. The DOJ did not respond to PJ Media's request for comment about whether or not this new task force would investigate the SPLC, but the Christian leaders insisted Sessions' remarks bode ill for the left-wing smear group. I think that the Attorney General is making this statement today, warning against this dangerous movement. We can predict that the Attorney General and the DOJ will take active steps regarding the SPLC. Matt Staver, founder and chairman of the Christian legal nonprofit Liberty Counsel, told PJ Media Monday. Liberty Counsel is suing the Charity Navigator website GuideStar after it adopted the SPLC hate group labels, smearing Liberty Counsel and many others. My guess is that Sessions is setting the FBI or some outlet of the Justice Department to take an objective look at this whole concept of hate labeling, its impact, its origins, and its legitimacy. Lieutenant General retired Jerry Bolkin, executive vice president of the Family Research Council, told PJ Media. He suggests the task force itself might investigate the SPLC. Quote, the SPLC has targeted religious groups, particularly, not exclusively, but particularly Christian groups and Christian individuals, and that's why we at FRC were targeted, Boykin explained. The SPLC has marked FRC a, quote, hate group because the organization supports traditional Christian sexual morality. This marking inspired a terrorist attack against the FRC in 2012. When you've got an organization in the United States that's illegitimately targeting groups because of their Christian views, and you have agencies in the federal data that are legitimizing that data, that is a recipe for disaster, Boykin said, referring to the troubled history of federal agencies relying on SPLC data. On Friday, Fox News' Tucker Carlson reported that the FBI had an ongoing relationship with the SPLC. Attorney General Jeff Sessions has got to get to the bottom of that problem. John Ray, the director of creative production at D. James Kennedy Ministries, called Sessions' remarks, quote, heartening. The SPLC first attacked DJKM in 2006. The organization, which produces television programs, is suing Amazon and the SPLC after Amazon refused to access to the Amazon Smile charity program due to the SPLC hate group marker. Rab told PJ Media that the SPLC's deceit has actually resulted in an act of anti-Christian terrorism at the Family Research Council and may have possibly played a role in the shooting of a U.S. congressman last year. James Hodgkinson, the man who shot Steve Scalise, liked the SPLC on Facebook, and the SPLC has repeatedly attacked Scalise. Perhaps the DOJ is turning from the partisan political maneuvering on behalf of the left that it became known for during the Obama administration, and instead taking a renewed interest in the rule of law and the Constitution, opening its eyes to the abuses of a group that has doled out misinformation to the government while raising hundreds of millions of dollars by fear-mongering and falsely smearing Christian believers, Rabe added. Boykin, the FRC VP, also emphasized the SPLC's wealth. They've reached about $500 million in their coffers, he noted. They have made that money by fleecing people, by running scams. This whole hate labeling is a scam, Boykin argued. They demonstrated that it was a scam when they listed Ben Carson on it. When they settled for $3.375 million with Muslim reformer Maajid Nawaz. That demonstrates that this is illegitimate, but they've made a lot of money doing it, and they don't want to stop. Jesus, there's quite a bit of this, to be honest. But, I mean, I think I'll leave it there. This is, as I said, from PJ Media. And to be quite frank, the SPLC is one of those organizations that's been bigged up for the past, 3-4 years as a reliable source for information on who's committing atrocious acts of hate speech. And 9 times out of 10, it's actually just an organization that highlights who commits gross acts of conservatism, not basically progressivism. So it is a very odd organization, a pro-black support group with no black members on its board whatsoever. That makes, as quite rightly, they did get the numbers right on that. About, I think it was $500 million in charity funding, and mainly produces ways of censoring the internet. So, yay! Great work.
Because and first off, let me just be clear in stating my bias, because I think that's a valuable thing to do. I'm opposed to the SPLC and have been for some time, because they label things hateful as you know, like, okay, so they label things hate by labeling them neo-Confederate. And what that means is that you are, somebody born in the modern era that dislikes the Union activities preceding and during the Civil War. But they take it to mean that you also support slavery, that you also support all this like fundamental evil that was going on in the South, but also the North. And they ignore all your reasons for whatever that is. They just label you the thing and then move on. So I don't like them because they've effectively called Mises a hate group. The Mises Institute in Georgia. They've effectively called them a hate group. They've called Ron Paul and Lew Rockwell hate mongers because they're neo-Confederates too, by the same tone as fucking SPLC is claiming is valuable all the time. And they've also made multiple claims against multiple other institutions that aren't hateful at all, just trying to get a different view of history than the ones that essentially the powerful revisionists would like you to believe.
The main problem, the main problem I have with SPLC is just their rampant hypocrisy. I mean, I will be brutally honest, I am heavily biased against them. Mainly because they are hypocrites. I don't really like people who actively don't just, not even when they get shown the hypocrisy, they double down. That's the other problem I've got with them. If they keep doubling down like that, they don't really have an answer to the arguments you're making to them. So they're just going to keep shouting at you and defaming you until you give up. And my argument is just don't let them. There are laws that prevent people from doing that sort of thing, and they should be used. If you're going to have to deal with things inside the system as they stand today, that's the only way it's going to work.
Well, yeah, but I also wanted to be clear that I don't like PJ Media, because they try to make it seem as though what they're doing is unbiased, and they try to make it seem as though what they're doing is providing a voice of reason, but they only ever seem to cover things from a conservative bent for the benefit of conservatives. So
True.
It's good to remember that when they write an article about religious liberty, they're not including Muslims in that, for instance.
No, that's fair enough. I mean, they will bang the drum for liberty until it's for somebody else's that they don't like to have that liberty. And I get their arguments, but I don't agree with them. I find their rhetoric sorely lacking.
Right. Well, and I preface both of those because if I'm going to talk about something from PJ Media against the SPLC, it's basically that left-right divide I talked about. Of course, PJ Media is going to be against it, and of course, when PJ Media is against it, the SPLC is going to be against whatever PJ Media says. And when the SPLC says something, PJ Media is going to be against whatever they say, because they're fundamentally oppositional institutions. So it's good to remember that.
No, that is true.
And it's also good to remember, by the way, that according to Crunchbase, effectively, PJ Media is part of an outlet set called Expansis, which churns out a huge amount of bulk articles, and is like it lists PJ Media as funded by mergers and acquisitions, which means effectively this merger and acquisition means that they can publish whatever they want, because they get like essentially a blank check from people like Expansis, which are housed in the United Kingdom, if I remember correctly. Like I know that Anthony Catterson is in the United Kingdom. I'm not sure how much sway he has over the politics of PJ Media, but it's definitely good to remember where they come from. And I'm not trying to poison the well either. I'm not saying don't listen to them because blah. But what I
mean,
am
personally,
saying,
the fact that they're coming from the UK is actually quite a boost to my morale, if I'm honest, because it shows that there are still some organizations. Well, it shows some organizations at least are willing to spend that little bit extra to promote certain values above others, like the ability to speak over the ability to be offended.
Yeah, well, yeah. And that's what the SPLC definitely doesn't like, because they like to control thoughts. It's part of the leftists' culture war. And that's the thing, like before the left was like, fucking ramen packets and like brown rice at dorms in Berkeley, and they had proverbial skin in the game. I can't remember who brought it up recently, but the modern leftists are given a lot more than the previous leftists were, and as a result, they have much less to worry about in terms of losing. They have much, and as a result, they don't have to worry as much about what they say, how they deliver the message, etc. They just have to keep doing what they're doing to get their funding, to get their universities. So it's good to remember that too. I'm just trying to be fair and balanced, whatever. But yeah, I definitely do see this, like, religious liberty will only ever exist when people start standing up and realizing that the state isn't the institution which should protect that, and that if you have a state, somebody's religion is going to be oppressed, guaranteed. But I don't think that's going to be the prevailing mindset anytime soon. So
true. Unfortunate, but there it is. But, I mean, there was a follow-up article as well to just sort of drive the nail home, though, regarding the SPLC. Because I think one of their CEOs got caught out in some sort of scandal after a court case divorce on his divorce appeared into the public domain somehow. I'm assuming all cases are public domain once they're complete.
Yeah.
And I don't know how long this took, but it is going back a while. However, I think it's worth mentioning because it gives you sort of an insight into the mindset of some of these people. So, and again, this is from, I believe that Big League Politics is fairly right-leaning, isn't it?
Well, I actually don't know. I don't go there a lot. Big League Politics, you said?
Yeah. I'm not certain what side it leans on. I'm assuming it's right because it's lambasting the SPLC and it's...
well, I mean, and also, of course, it's called Big League, and fucking the right, for some reason, needs to associate everything with sports.
Yeah, I don't get that myself, but hey, swings and roundabouts. Anyway, court docs, SPLC co-founder accused of trying to molest stepdaughter with sex toy. The SPLC is known for doling out questionable hate group labels. A recently uncovered court document from the divorce proceedings of a prominent Southern Poverty Law Center figure alleges horrific conduct on behalf of one of the most influential lawyers in America. Maureen Dees, ex-wife of SPLC co-founder Morris Dees, filed for divorce on March 8, 1979, after a decade-long marriage marred by difficulties, according to a appellate brief obtained by Big League Politics. The brief was filed by Maury Smith, Julia S. Waters, and Charles M. Brooke, attorneys for Maureen and the Alabama Court of Civil Appeals. According to court testimony, among other perverted sexual behavior, Dees attempted to molest his 18-year-old stepdaughter with a sex toy. Holly Buck was Maureen Dees' daughter from a previous marriage. Holly testified that in the summer of 1977, Morris attempted to molest her in the following incident. One night, Maureen and Morris were sitting drinking wine and discussing a case Morris was trying. Holly was with them around 11 or 12 o'clock. Maureen went to bed, and Holly stayed up with Morris discussing the case. Morris kept offering Holly wine, some of which she accepted. Holly testified that she declined, choosing to go to bed instead. She went to her room and then went into the bathroom. Looking out the window, she saw Morris in the bushes beside the bathroom window looking in. She said, "Morris, is that you?" But he said nothing and ran away. 2 months later, things got worse. Morris entered Holly's room from Morris and Maureen's daughter's Ellie's room through the bathroom, the document says. He was in his underwear, and he sat on the bed where Holly was lying with his stomach facing away from the door. He touched her on her back and woke her up. He told her that he brought her sick a present, and he presented her with a vibrator. He plugged it in and said he had brought it and rubbed it. Sorry, he plugged it in and said he'd brought it to her. He proceeded to rub it on her back and said, "Let me show you how to use it." According to Holly's testimony, she declined, but Morris proceeded anyway. He started to place it between, I think it's supposed to be her legs, when she raised her voice and said no loudly, according to the brief. He was only wearing a pair of bikini underwear shorts during the incident, according to Holly. About 2 hours later, she'd fallen back asleep and he came back in. He brought the vibrator with him, plugged it in, and said again, "Let me show you how to use it." He tried to show her again by putting it between her legs, but she raised her voice again, and he stopped. He took it and left. And then they have the full passage from the incident itself, copied, basically, from the court documents. This is not the only disturbing passage from the appellate brief. Big League Politics is a series of upcoming reports detailing allegations against the co-founder of one of America's most powerful nonprofits. SPLC did not respond to an email request for comment regarding whether or not they condone Dee's behavior in a time for publication. When Big League Politics called for comment, SPLC's media contact briskly hung up the phone. Editor's note: citations to the court record have been left out of the quotations in this story. So, yeah. Bit worrying, that one, to be fair, especially if that's just the tip of the iceberg. But, what are your thoughts, Jeremiah? I think the article speaks well enough for itself, but still, it's worth getting some opinions here, because I just find this well, it's so good when it's in print in a court record like that, you know.
Well, are there any records?
Well, yeah, there will be. There'll be appellate briefs and all sorts of stuff.
No,
I mean, you will get stenography.
Okay. But are there any records of the thing actually happening? Is what I mean.
Oh, what do you mean? Has there been a criminal case?
Well, like, are there tapes? Whatever. Like, is there? Any
I have, given the fact this was 1970s, I doubt that there was much in the way of video equipment going on in use there. But that's part of the problem with cold case claims like these is it's very difficult to prove what actually happened, especially if no actual assault physically occurred. You had basically the threat of it. I mean, you could argue that to some extent it did, but since no actual implement was inserted anywhere, it'd be incredibly difficult to prove a physical violation.
Well, and an
emotional one, definitely.
All she is attempting to say is you molested her. Molest simply means bother. In fact, the fact that definition is that loose is, you know, I mean, to be honest, is something that I've had jokes with friends about since, you know, sophomore year of high school, when I found out molest basically means bother. You know, so we'll say stop molesting me when fucking it's something funny and simple. But, like, you know, jokes aside, the fact is that this would be very hard to prove, and I see a lot of possibility that this is just somebody getting thrown under the bus again. I mean, not to say that it didn't happen, not to say that he didn't do this, but to say that it'd be interesting to see if there was any way to even prove it, because I don't think there is. I think that there's so much isn't.
No, this is the problem. At this point, there's no way to prove it, especially
Right.
as the case is now, the case is now settled. It has been probably for some time. And it's only coming to light probably due to some investigative journalism on behalf of big league politics in particular. Just digging through court records and saying, let's see what happens if we look into this and see if we find anything. And lo and behold, they did. It just happened to be quite juicy. And I mean, to my mind, it would not surprise me if it was true, because balance of probability, the powerful enjoy abusing power, and lawyers fit, unfortunately, that profile quite well. They are quite a common group to fall to psychopathy, and as such, they do have a tendency to abuse power over others, both within the family and within the business itself. We'd need to see more evidence, probably, and ideally something physical that actually proves it. But again, given the time frame, highly unlikely you will ever be able to get that kind of data. But there are reasons why there are laws in, I think, both the US and the UK to try and tackle some of those incidents where it is largely hearsay, but you can still win a case if the preponderance of accusals is too high, if that makes sense. If there's more than one person claiming something happened, then it's more likely to have happened. And if 2 or 3 or 4 people claim it, then it's enough usually to persuade a jury.
Well, if it goes to trial with a jury, if it's not just handled by a judge.
True, but in a lot of cases, if it's going to be something in a Crown Court, for example, I'm speaking to UK law, and I'm not certain. Again, US law, it varies from state to federal, and it's very convoluted. UK law is a little bit simpler. If it's something criminal like molestation, it'll go to a Crown Court. If it goes to a Crown Court, it'll be tried by a jury. The only thing a judge can do is make recommendations based on like the law and what has been presented. So if a judge finds that, or he can throw a case out completely if there isn't enough evidence. And they usually won't do that unless it's like you've got people who have been admittedly confirmed they weren't there, and they're picked out in a witness lineup, but they can prove they weren't there. Then the witness statement would be thrown out, and therefore, if there's no other evidence, the guy would walk free. However, if it's multiple people saying, no, this person was definitely there, and we can prove it, here's photos, here's this, or this person was definitely molested me, and about 15 other people eye Spartacus on top of that, it can happen.
So on that level, you would have to basically catch them in a lie and then prove their alibi false.
Effectively, yes. And in a lot of cases, that is plausible.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that would be reasonable, at least to prove that somebody was involved in something shady. And at the very least, at that point, they would start to see some sort of benefit to settling, or like taking some sort of guilty plea. So that would be nice.
It can be helpful that way. But I mean, as I said, this is a very old case, and
it's
it just highlights. it's unlikely to see the light in a criminal court. And more importantly, the only real impact it can have now is cast a cloud over the reputation of the company, which, to be fair, might be enough at this point. It's enough damage if you can basically accurately defame without committing libel an entire group by defaming their founders. That is a very effective way to discredit the work that a group is doing, whatever it may be.
Well, of course, that does sort of make me dislike that sort of thing because, like, I don't know, like anybody who's been here for a while should know that I put out a video against the idea of Me Too because I don't like the idea that social media and or public opinion can completely destroy somebody even before they've been convicted or even tried in a court. It seems to me like a rather barbaric way to deal with things and a witch hunty way to do things in a very specific way of phrasing that.
And to a large extent, I agree. However, if it's being done within a court and it sways a jury, then it's the same. It'd be the same argument as swaying the masses of society. If those arguments work in a court of law as well as within the court of public opinion, then there's not much you can say about it except that it's something that needs to be looked into.
Assuming the jury remains impartial. I mean, that's why Tommy Robinson, the whole case even existed to begin with, because theoretically, and I don't take this side, by the way, I think that it's total bullshit, but theoretically he could have swayed the jury by posing outside with a camera and asking the questions he did. The jury could have also been walking in at a similar time and could have heard what he was saying or seen the footage online on their smartphones and decided that they were going to take a different stance and one that was biased because they now knew the case.
Yeah, to be fair though, mate, a lot of that's bullshit for British law. You can't take cell phones in, look at cell phones when you're on the case. If it's a major case, they will sequester the jury.
But it's not
if
like
they're really worried about that.
It's not like they have caught set up. It's not like they have caught set up. They're still going to be allowed to go home.
Depends on the trial. Depends on the trial. If it's a major trial, yes, but if it's a major trial, then in a lot of cases they will sequester the jury for the entirety of the case.
But just
to protect the jury. Here. Probably not in this incident. No, to be fair, I think in this incident, I'd say that it was again, a gross perversion of the term contempt of court. What he was actually charged with was disturbing the peace.
Well,
which is a blanket term they have started using over here to try and put activists. Everywhere. Anybody who speaks out in a way that makes it harder or could be construed as offensive, then it can become a problem.
Well, and that's what he was initially charged with, but the charges started to stack up, and the primary one that they kept him in for was contempt. So there is that part.
Because the contempt is basically related to a previous court case hearing where he didn't watch his words and he didn't learn from what basically from basic premises.
I thought it was because the judge had said no filming outside the courthouse, and he filmed anyway.
No, as I understand, well, in order for that to work, he would have had to have been in the courtroom to begin with, and outside the courthouse. Yeah, but there's no way for him to know what the court is ruling on that point if he's outside the courthouse anyway. He'd need to be informed of that, and nobody came out to inform him of it. So it's a catch-22 situation.
It's not a matter of the ruling, though. It's a matter of the individual jurors, and other elements of the court seeing the footage and changing their minds. Like that's, and I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm saying
No, I
that's
know.
what the courts were saying.
I get that, but the problem is that you. The problem I have with the whole Tommy Robbins thing is process. You're supposed to follow process when you're trying to deal with an arrest or something. You don't arrest somebody on disturbing the peace and then try them on a completely different charge unless you amount a case of evidence. Now, I don't see how they could have found a body of evidence that was sufficient enough within the half hour between arrest and conviction of crime. That's the thing that that concerns the hell out of me, is the speed of turnaround on this man. And I don't agree with everything he says, but at the same time, I sure as hell don't agree with the total breach of process just so that they can basically shut one man up and keep him from rocking the boat any more than he already has been.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, there's also the fact that that there's a ton of evidence to support the idea that a lot of his ideas support fascism. So I don't endorse his ideas, but at the same time, I see a greater problem with starting this sort of precedent up than having this sort of thing be sort of let go. They could have just let it go. They could have let him go, but they didn't. And they chose not to for a very specific reason. They wanted to make an example out of him so that everybody else stayed away too.
Yeah, well, the problem with making a martyr out of somebody is it just pisses people off. And
for a time,
he may not be dead.
Talking about it anymore.
Well, I think to some extent, well, it wasn't that long ago Trump said he would try to see what he could do to try and get Tommy free.
But he's not free, right?
No, I know he's not free. I think it was a flippant comment, to be honest, mate. But it wasn't that long ago. That's the point. It was only it was only last week, for crying out loud. I think Trump was over here, wasn't it?
Right,
was it 2 weeks ago? Time flies.
To something doesn't actually mean that the public at large still cares, and even the right is barely talking about it anymore because Assange is in jeopardy.
Oh yeah, but that's, again, remember the way that the narrative works. You keep people moving, you keep people guessing,
right,
and you keep them on their toes so they forget about the old.
That's what I'm saying, though. You create enough martyrs that they can't keep up.
That's, well, it's an interesting way of doing it. Then you've just got the group martyrs, the free speech or free thinkers as being basically the penalized group. And once you've got that, the
right-wing version of free thought and free speech, because realistically, they're still trying to criminalize a lot of people's beliefs when they talk about burning Muslims, etc.
If you watch the left, particularly in how they work, they are starting to cannibalize themselves. So this is why there's that walk away campaign that's sort of been slowly gaining momentum.
Right, but the alt-right is the right's version of walk away, and they started that a while ago. So I'm just saying,
and it didn't work very well.
I'm just saying that neither side are real good arbiters or, defenders of speech or thought or anything, and neither side is cannibalizing more than either. So that's all I'm saying.
Well, from my view, I mean, neither side has the solution, but to be quite frank, I think people listening to that, I'm assuming you people consider that as a given at the moment. Because if you're listening to us, you're probably understanding that.
And you're probably pissed off at the media.
Yeah, and that's why you're trying to get some alternative stuff. And some world news as well. Actually, I've got a good bit on that one from South Africa.
Yeah, read that, and then in order to close out the show, read a semi-short thing. From that, we'll discuss it a bit.
Oh, this ain't that long.
Yeah, well, I have to leave at what would that be? 2 minutes till. So,
fair enough.
But read that. We'll discuss that a little, and then I'll read an excerpt from an article that's, I think, relatively amusing, just to get people laughing at the system today.
Fair enough.
It talks about how big erotica is making jokes about Bigfoot erotica is racist.
Oh, Jesus Christ. All right. So, from the BBC, South Africa to amend constitution to allow land expropriation. South Africa will push ahead with plans to amend the constitution to allow land expropriation without compensation, its president says. In a recorded address, President Cyril Ramaphosa said the ruling ANC will finalize a proposed amendment allowing the move. He said the reform was of, quote, critical importance to the economy. Recent months have seen growing anger about the slow pace of land reform in South Africa. The country's white minority is believed to have disproportionate hold over land, with a few thousand white commercial farmers possessing most of the fertile lands. However, critics fear expropriation could lead to land grabs, as happened in neighboring Zimbabwe. In the video, Mr. Ramaphosa said that, quote, a proper reading of the Constitution allowed expropriation of land without compensation, quote, in the public interest. The ANC would go, quote, thoroughly through the parliamentary process with the amendment. The country passed a law allowing expropriation in 2016. However, it said it had become patently clear that the people want the Constitution to be more explicit on the matter. This is the constitutional democracy that we fought for, the president said. We call on all South Africans to work with us on developing a social compact for economic inclusion, economic growth, and jobs for all. Around 10% of land in white ownership has been transferred to black owners since the end of the apartheid, which is only a third of the ANC's target. So they're looking to try and get about 30% of, that's the end of the article, by the way, looking to get about 30% of land eventually transferred over into the black citizenry because diversity, I guess. I think that's the only explanation I've got or the only justification that they're trying to provide on this, I think.
Well, so the reasons effectively are because of the way Africa was colonized. And I don't agree with their solutions to it, but it's about more than diversity. It's about trying to, essentially provide reparations for the people of for the quote original people of Africa. So that's, I guess, what that's for. And like you can disagree with that or agree with that, but that's their primary reason. And now
so it's the sins of the father argument.
Yes, yeah. And I don't agree with it, by the way, to be clear. Because I think that the only way forward is for people to find new ground, not try and reattain old ground. Unless you're going to reattain it entirely by having anarchy. If you wanted to have anarchy and kick anybody out who wasn't down, that would make sense to me. But what doesn't make sense to me is to kick people out on the basis of race and also steal their land at the same time, because that just creates an environment hostile to any sort of potential change. And additionally, to 2 points. The first point would be that if Africa and the general mindset was all about trying to promote justice, then you wouldn't see things like Russia Today video on how there's mass migration happening and basically borders being stormed by large groups of people with weapons. In what appears to be an act of some sort of like ethnic war, where a sea of people of other races will come to a place of another race and try to storm the borders and come over in numbers, because some of them will get caught, but the majority won't. And then there's the other element of it that Wakanda isn't real. And that ideally, like, circumstances for the best markets and the best international relations don't happen if you don't have international relations. And this isn't a way to foment that. The best is the most successful societies in the modern day in a modern context have international trade, and people aren't likely to do trade with regions like this, which seem hostile to them, unless, of course, those regions are willing to make some concessions. And a region like this, which seems unwilling to make concessions, well, I mean, look at Venezuela. It's doing the same thing.
I mean, they did, yeah, exactly. They did exactly that. They appropriated land for the people and then promptly couldn't run the businesses. And nobody was really continuing to stay in the country to invest or build new businesses. I mean,
right.
Whole swaths of people just basically upped sticks and left simply because one company got land grabbed. And anybody else who's planning to invest in South Africa will be worrying about exactly the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So, on a more humorous note, The Verge is such trash. They posted this article. All those Bigfoot erotica jokes are helping normalize white supremacy. Yes, yeah, that's a real headline for something somebody really said and really thinks.
Oh my god. I've got to mute.
House candidate Denver Riggleman should be taken to task, but not for enjoying cryptid porn. The internet has long been a place where we're free to indulge our seediest desires, a playground where letting your freak flag fly isn't just acceptable, but practically expected. But as that space has become a more and more integral part of our daily lives, it's also become increasingly common for some of those private explorations and enjoyments to wind up in the public eye. There was the Time Newsweek reporter Kurt Eichenwald. Tweeted out a photo that revealed he'd been browsing tentacle porn, for example, or the Time Talking Points memos John Marshall accidentally shared a link from Pornhub, or the time that Ted Cruz's Twitter account liked a tweet containing incest porn.
Oh, Jesus.
And now, in the most direct instance of explicit content taking over our political conversation, Virginia Democrat Leslie Cockburn, which is a real name, by the way, that's separate from the article. It's Cockburn versus Riggleman over there. A candidate for the House of Representatives has brought her opponent's interest in Bigfoot erotica into her campaign rhetoric. On Sunday evening, Cockburn tweeted out a screen cap of one of Denver Riggleman's Instagram posts, noting that his erotic interests were, quote, not what we need on Capitol Hill. Predictably, Cockburn's tweet quickly went viral, inspiring Bigfoot to trend on Twitter and the online commentariat to offer up opinions and more often jokes about what we should all be taking from this story. Some agreed with Cockburn, taking it upon themselves to ridicule Riggleman for his interest in XXX cryptid content. Others argued that Cockburn's tweet amounted to kink shaming, an unsavory practice of mocking someone for their unusual erotic interests. Still, others pushed back against the kink shaming charge, arguing that even if that were the case, it was wholly acceptable to mock Riggleman, who'd campaigned alongside white supremacists for his outer taste in pornography. But the problem with all these arguments, the problem with Bigfootgate, period, is that Riggleman's sexual proclivities have nothing to do with his ability to effectively serve as a member of the House of Representatives. And the more we focus on the conversation on the salacious details of what a candidate indulges in privately, the more we shift the discussion away from issues that actually impact constituents' lives, like, for instance, Riggleman's willingness to hit the campaign trail with avowed white nationalists. It's not particularly shocking that Riggleman's sexual interest in cryptids has generated so much interest. We live in a puritanical society where open discussion of sexuality are generally frowned upon, an attitude that promotes ignorance about the diversity and complexity of the human sexual experience. And though our sensibilities have relaxed in recent years, we're still collectively blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I'm not going to read the rest of that piece, but the general idea, and this is what's laughable, and this is what I want to leave y'all with today after I get Lupinet's impressions here. It's it's the idea that two things. First off, that it's a promotion of white supremacy to make these jokes because it advances a puritanical mindset, and also that it's an advancement of white supremacy because it moves the issue that's important to discuss here from white supremacy to Bigfoot porn. So both of those are rather tangential and dumb reasons to make this article, but I guess, whatever. They wanted to make an article about Bigfoot porn so that they could get that tasty revenue.
Oh, my kitty on. Okay, the fact that I guess maybe I'm naive. I didn't even realize there was such a thing as Bigfoot porn.
There's porn of everything. Rule 43.
True, porn of everything, but still Bigfoot. What? Just why? But even so, he can't act on it, can he? So it really doesn't matter what his kink is if it's a total fantasy that he can never act upon. And if he does find Bigfoot and manages to seduce him, then boy, congratulations, I guess. You'll have a lot of little big feet.
Yeah, well,
but, I mean, I can't even believe I'm making this conversation. It's so ridiculous. It's things like this that make me wonder, is this Poe's law? Is this real? Is this really something we are talking about right now? Or am I just dreaming?
And let's just be really specific. It's not that good, what he posted. So it's not exactly erotica either.
I mean, the Coke Eichenwald thing had more it had more balls than this in a way. Well, it definitely had more tentacles, but I mean, that one was he just kept on doubling down, saying that he was talking about trying to show something to his wife to make them. And his kids were trying to back him up on this, that tentacle porn existed and he couldn't find it. But he found some other form of Japanese porn and kept that up there while sharing that picture, which, oh God, I have no idea where he was trying to go with that. But it just it's things like that. It's like, does it matter? No, it really doesn't matter. And if you think it does matter, then you really got to start questioning all those other things that people have been saying don't matter, like homosexuality or transgenderism. All that stuff then comes back onto the table if you start dealing with kinks in that way. And it's why I don't pay attention to them. If you've got a kink, that's yours. You don't have to share it with me, and I really don't care. It's your business, not mine. And the more people keep it that way, I think the better everybody will be off. But it's that kind of principle. If you've got a kink and it's something completely fictitious, I see no problem with it whatsoever. So to make a big deal out of it just seems like petty in the extreme.
Of course, to make this article about it,
even really, more so.
Because this article is saying that it normalizes white supremacy because it focuses on this.
How did I don't even understand how that's normalization of white supremacy. To normalize something is to make it acceptable.
That's all. That's all they wanted.
I wish the headlines would make sense, though. It's like, let's have a non sequitur.
Well, makes sense. It makes sense if you buy directly into the identity politics, and that's exactly what The Verge wants. That's the reason it's such like a laughable outlet for getting your news related to gamers and Gamergate. Because if you get your news from The Verge, you're not going to get like a less biased opinion. And by the way, this article is this person on The Verge. This article is this person's debut. They've only just now written this article, and their name is Lux Alpatraum. So I mean, on that level, yeah, it really and that's the thing. Oh wait, no, it's not their debut. It's just their most recent one. Okay, so they've written a lot of dumb articles. So this person's got one. It looks like their first article ever on this site was on November 25th, 2013, and it was about 4K porn.
Oh God.
Sex education, fucking Facebook, HPV vaccine, porn, sex ed webcomic, sex life, condoms, sex research. This person seems rather obsessed, I think. I'd love to know their credentials and why they're constantly talking about fucking sex, porn, and all this other stuff. It really does seem like they're trying to normalize themselves before they normalize anything else, much less white supremacy.
Yeah,
Whatever.
always look at what somebody's shouting at the most.
Yeah. Anyway, on that note, we wish you a bad morning, and if you want to join the group on Facebook, you can do that. If you want to like the page, if you want to sub, like, blah, there's plenty of ways that you can support the show in the description, and we would definitely appreciate it. Bad morning to y'all. Smash the state and fuck the system.
Have a bad morning, everybody.